Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. So, a bit of a different video today. Sorry it isn't the tier 6 and 7 review just yet. I'm completely fine, but recently I got corona. It didn't hit me very hard, it was completely fine really, but I'm pretty sure I've got some of the long-term effects at the moment and my gameplay right now just isn't as good as I want it to be for the review. It's a really big video and I want to get it right, and I don't want to rush it if I know I can do it better a bit later. So this is sort of a more light-hearted, I guess, video to fill the gap. Thanks for sticking with me, and I hope this one is interesting too. So, just before we start, even though this video covers what I think are the worst event vehicles, I'm also not trying to say that these vehicles are bad as event vehicles. I actually think regarding the unique vehicles in this list, an event is the best way to implement them. It's great to have iconic or interesting vehicles in the game, even if they're not very good. And having them as an event means that people don't need to pay for them outright or are forced to play them in the tech tree to advance. So it's the best way to have them, and I hope we see more. Also, regarding the rankings of this video, apart from the top 3 or so, the first lot are not really in a strict order. I've ordered them in terms of my personal preference, but I don't want to present that as objective. As a lot of these vehicles are very different, you can't really compare them against each other very well, in the sense that it's not really applicable to directly compare the competence of a bomber to a sub-chaser in a relative way. Most of the ranking for this list is decided by the actual ability of the vehicle, but in some cases it's partially swayed by other things, such as how the vehicle was released and what it offers in the game. Anyway, long intro aside, let's actually start. Thanks for being here, and as always, I really hope you enjoy. Also, it says here, don't forget to let me know in the comments what your least favorite event vehicle is. This is a good way to bait interaction on your Wasn't meant to say that. Number 10. For our first spot today, we have the JU388J. A very interesting vehicle, but not a very user-friendly one. This was a reward for the Battlefield Engineer Crafting event from 2019 as one of the higher rewards, and can currently be found on the marketplace for around 100 Gaijin coin. So it's a pretty pricey collectible and absolutely not worth paying for, even though it is a tier 4 premium. The JU388J is absolutely unique though. It's a heavy fighter developed from the airframe of the JU188, which can be found in the tech tree. It doesn't offer the best climb rate or the most outstanding speed, but its firepower is pretty amazing on paper. It comes with 4 20mm cannons and 2 30mm cannons, but it's not quite so simple. Firstly, 2 20s are in the
Schräger music
arrangement, and the others don't point forwards, they're angled down, so it requires quite a different approach to use them effectively. This isn't the worst thing in the world, but as the lead of this aircraft functions differently to almost every other aircraft in the game, you kind of need to unlearn how you aim to use it effectively, which does make it quite a challenge to use, especially if only played on and off. This one isn't going to win many one-on-one fights, and it lacks the climb rate to intercept bombers, so it's a bit more of a vulture in ARB, and even then it requires more effort to get kills with it than other aircraft at the BR that perform better. Extra tedium for little reward. You might think that because the guns point down, the 388 will be good at ground attack, but not really. It has no high-performing AP rounds or suspended weaponry, so all it can do is strafe out light targets. And despite the guns pointing down, it's harder to aim at ground targets because of the offset. It's like being in a dive while not being in a dive, if that makes sense. And having to compensate for the angle really throws my brain off. Maybe that's just a me thing though. With some competent maneuvers, you can dogfight with some of the heavier aircraft you'll see, and even if they get on your tail, you do have a twin 13mm to cut them down with when they're slow. This thing is quite a nice underdog aircraft though, in the sense that getting kills with it feels more rewarding. Getting an ace in a 1 in 9 is great, but getting 2 or 3 kills with this thing feels even better. And on the flip side, if you get shot down while playing it, it's like, well, yeah, that was bound to happen. So it's a very stress-free plane to fly in that sense. You feel great when you win, and you don't beat yourself up if you lose. And actually, I really like this plane. Aesthetically, it's a very pretty aircraft. And one thing it's weirdly good at, actually, is upside-down head-ons. By turning upside down, the guns of course angle upwards, so their arc has a better spread for lead, and this also lets you peel off faster after firing. Doing this also confuses enemies as well. Why would you ever do this? So they often don't even bother dodging out of the way, thinking that you're just messing around or don't know what you're doing, or even might just assume that you're a bomber with no forward guns, as the name is similar to the bomber version. So this can be a really fun way to play it. Ultimately though, it's not an amazing aircraft by any respect. It's very limited in what it can do, and even though when the stars align and you get a perfect deflection and land those 30s, the steps that you need to employ to get to that point are not worth the effort usually. If you like weird vehicles though, this one is close to the top of the weird pyramid. Weird pyramid? Definitely not. It might be up your street. Fun is relative, but I wouldn't recommend paying €100 for this one. Number 9. The PBM-3. This was a reward for a one-off event back in 2019, the Sea Voyage, which I guess a lot of you probably don't remember. The event had two main awards, this thing and the Premium Leningrad Destroyer, which today is on the marketplace. The PBM, though, wasn't given out as a coupon and as such has become extremely rare. I don't actually recall seeing one personally in the last few years or so. The event also let you earn this profile icon and some sea-themed nose art, which is quite cool. The PBM-3 is a development of the PBM-1 we have in the tech tree, improved in every way, and as such has a higher BR of 3.0. The most standout aspect to this one is the ordnance it can carry, being able to take out 8 1,000-pound bombs, making its bomb load heavier than early B-17s for comparison. It also has a very high SL modifier for Tier 2 at 600%. But that's really the only standout for this one. What generally keeps bombers alive is either speed combined with intermittent spurts of maneuverability, or a decent climb rate with good defensive weaponry. In my experience, bombers that fall into either of these two sets can generally survive okay as far as bombers are concerned, but the PBM-3 hardly stands out in either of these attributes. Being a large flying boat, it's not very fast and can barely climb when laden with the bomb load that actually makes it interesting, causing it to be a very easy target for contemporary fighters. It is defended by 5 M250 cals that cover the sides, back and rear, but they are all single mountings. And generally with how parallax works on bomber gunners, single mounts are much harder to aim, in my experience anyway. This combined with the slow speed leads the Mariner to be taken out reasonably quickly. Although it does have just enough defensive maneuverability to be able to take out a fighter or two. The Mariner is huge, but it does have a lot of empty space, meaning it can take a few glancing hits. The best way of using bombers like this is defense into offense. If an enemy is diving at you, angle your plane level with their angle of attack and pull into their negative if possible. This gives them much less surface area to shoot at, and adjusting aim while pulling the nose down is much harder, especially at high speed, which an aircraft usually is if it's diving. This kind of maneuver will usually let you get away with non-critical damage. 99% of fighters won't expect you to turn with them, so they're most likely going to turn right back at you, not expecting some kind of dogfight. After repeating this move for the second pass, the enemy fighter is now much slower and much easier to hit with your gunners. This is my favourite way to play bombers, and it does make them a bit more interesting. And luckily the Mariner is just maneuverable enough to employ these tactics too. But that sadly doesn't quite make it reliable. As it's also very slow and large, it's unfortunately not effective in naval battles either. Float planes and flying boats can cap points in that mode, but an aircraft this large and slow has no chance against the AI naval gunners, even at high altitude. I would even say that this version is comparatively worse than the standard Mariner at 2.0. Despite having literally half the bomb load, that version fights much weaker aircraft, and if you are on a good crew, it can be extremely difficult to take down sometimes, considering that most enemies are probably only going to have rifle caliber machine guns. Also, as a bit of a side note here, there is actually a PBM-5A in the game files that's been here since 2018. This version is much better defended, so if it ever gets added, it likely will be pretty good. Although, as a lot of vehicles in the CDK sadly end up, it may just be left there forever. Anyway, the Mariner joins this list ultimately because it doesn't offer much reliability over the tech tree bombers you already have. The fact that it is a float plane is nice, but it doesn't really have any ability to utilize this. And due to its speed, it's possible to fly for 5 minutes and get intercepted without being able to do anything, which is, of course, not really very fun. It is an interesting vehicle, float planes and flying boats are of course the best, and I'm still holding out hope for the PBM-5 sometime in the future. But as a vehicle on its own, it doesn't offer much. Number 8. The IL-2 M82. This was the first reward for the third season of World War Mode, Road to the West, which came and went a couple of years ago in 2020. For completing tasks in the event and earning 4 stars, you got this quite odd-looking version of the IL-2, and really, despite another IL-2 variant being at a lower BR, this is really the worst one. Functionally, it's a slightly slower, slightly weaker version of the first IL-2, 1941, with a back gunner at 2.7. You can't really be too harsh on a 2.7 attacker though, as it's not exactly bad to the point of not being able to engage ground targets effectively, but it just isn't as good as the other options available in the tech tree. The back gunner is nice. The Russian 50 cal is one of my favourite guns in the game, and no engine can survive more than a few hits from it. Although, back gunners only really come into play on an aircraft like this if you make a mistake, so the battle rating being higher at the expense of a situational defensive advantage doesn't really justify it for me. IL-2s in general though are deceptively agile, to the point where you can dogfight with almost anything. With some good flap management, there's really only a few aircraft that you'll struggle with, unless though you're pulled right into the vertical. The IL-2s are still heavy, so it will bleed a bit too much speed in a fight like that. But most players will see an IL-2 as an easy kill, so they'll be quite happy to turn with you, assuming that a bulky, heavy attacker won't be too much of a threat, and by the time they commit, they will have lost too much speed to run away from you. The M82 version can still fight like this and do everything the first IL-2 can, although it is slightly slower. Its ground ordnance is identical too, so it doesn't really offer anything actively over what's available in the tech tree. The worst thing about it though is the engine arrangement. Being a ground attacker, the ability to shrug off glancing hits from machine guns is really important. All of the other IL-2s have inline engines protected by armor. It isn't much armor, but from the front it is still fairly effective. As the M82 however is radial, it has no protection around the engine. And when you're a slow aircraft flying low over the battlefield, you are going to take hits from machine guns, and this version can't reliably tank those kind of hits. The pilot is still protected by a lot of armor, but the engine is left completely vulnerable. And this tied with the slower speed makes it notably less reliable than its tech tree analogs. So it ends up on this list for that reason. If you are a big fan of the IL-2s though, this one is still available, but you would need to be a really big fan to buy it at the current asking price of 115 Gaijin coin on the marketplace. Squadrons or commanders that finished high in the rankings of World War Mode got this aircraft as a coupon, so it is still obtainable, but in very limited numbers. So the price will only go up from this point, unless it ends up in one of the camo boxes as a rare drop or something. Either way, it's not really worth going for, but it is undeniably an interesting modification. Number 7. The P26A34. This one won't take too long to go through, as it is effectively just a reskin. It's functionally identical to the other reserve P26s in the tech tree, but unfortunately this is not the M2 version, so it doesn't get a 50 cal. Interestingly though, this is the only Filipino vehicle in the game, which does add an element of uniqueness. The A34 is also very old. It was first given away in late 2014 for the Thanksgiving Day sale. If you bought 2 packs, you got this plane for free. A year later, in 2015, it was obtainable again for Independence Day for placing first in the team 3 times. Currently today, this one is actually available. It can be found as a coupon on the marketplace for around 5 to 10 euros. It's not a rare one. The A34 is one of the vehicles that can drop from the vehicle trophy box. I was initially a bit reluctant to add this one here as it is just a reskin, and I'd rather pick unique vehicles to better compare them to what we have in the tech tree, but for me, the P-Shooter is the worst reserve aircraft. I don't think that's entirely objectively true, but in any 1.0 matchup, I'd pick the P-Shooter last. It doesn't really have reliable maneuverability or speed, or guns, really. I'm not keen on the 30 cal Brownings, they might also be my least favourite gun in the game. Almost all other reserve aircraft, other than the French, can ultimately rely on their maneuverability most of the time. And in 1.0, of course, you are most likely going to be fighting newer players, so if you're familiar with the game and have a decent crew, you can stand a chance in basically any matchup with the other reserve biplanes. The P26 struggles to do this to the same extent, so I've added it onto the list for this reason. It does have bombs and can pull some strong turns with the landing flaps, but these do bleed a bit too much speed. It's honestly just very unimpressive and effectively has no use. It's a premium reserve vehicle, there's no reason to buy it for efficient progress or to experience a new playstyle as it is just a reskin. This vehicle kind of offers nothing at every turn. You can't really be too hard on it though, as it was released as a completely optional bonus initially. And I like that. Getting a little collectible for buying something is nice, it would be great to revisit that kind of thing. Just hopefully with a slightly more impressive vehicle. Number 6. The Beaufighter Mark I prototype. Quite an interesting version and easily the most unique. While the other 3 Beaufighters come with the 4 central 20mm cannons, and the later version supplemented by wing-mounted machine guns, this version comes with 2 central 40mm cannons. They're quite interesting, but not the best comparatively. This was an early prize for the River Hunter season of the Battle Pass, and as it was received quite widely by players, it's currently only around 5 Gaijin coin if you'd like it yourself, but there are better options out there. The Mark I does have a lower BR than the other Beaufighters, but it doesn't really help much, as the guns are really the issue, not the enemies you'll fight. The 240s you get are of course very powerful. The HE will cripple any aircraft it hits, and a good burst with the AP can knock out a tank and ground forces without too much trouble. But they are hard to aim, and you don't get a lot of ammo. The guns as well, interestingly, aren't the same type. One gun is the Vickers S, which is the same cannon found on the Hurricane Mark IV, and the other gun is unique, the Rolls-Royce Type BH. The guns have 16 and 12 rounds respectively, and are slightly different. The Vickers Type has a more powerful HE round, and the Rolls-Royce a more powerful AP round. With some key binding, you can fire both guns separately, so you can really min-max this loadout, but it's usually more tedious than it's worth. Or rather, the effort you need to put in to make this vehicle work at its best isn't justified by its absolute potential. The guns are fairly inaccurate, and it will take a while to completely nail down the aim. And if you were to only play this one sporadically, you'd likely never really get the aim down to a point where the vehicle would become reliable, and I think that's my issue with it. It takes a while to get used to it enough to make it work well, but even then, when you get to that point, it doesn't really perform better than the other options you have in the tree. Although it never won't be satisfying to one-shot an aircraft with the 40mm HE. Its only semi-unique aspect is in the anti-tank roll, but even then it's not amazing. The velocity of the AP rounds from each gun vary by 170 meters a second, so you'll need to be relatively close to get both guns landing. Or you could fire each gun separately to increase accuracy and preserve ammo, but when spawning in Tank RB with this one, each belt has a spawn point requirement, so it's extremely expensive to spawn. But this is likely just an oversight more so than a balance decision. For gun CAS, it's okay, but still not outstanding. It's a big target for AA and lacks the speed or agility to get around enemy fighters. This version additionally loses the back gunner, which, as it's only a single 30 cal, wasn't amazing. I can't actually remember an instance of ever getting a kill with it, but at least you had it. Even the Hurricane Mark IV actually at 2.3 has more ammo for its twin 40s, and is still decently maneuverable and has some secondary MGs too. And additionally as well, as the AP penetration on the 20mm Hispanos the other Beaufighters use has recently been buffed considerably, this one gets even less impressive. Compared to its contemporaries, the Beaufighter Mark I just doesn't bring much to the table. But it is a really interesting modification, and in any case, I'm glad we have it in-game. Number 5. The Buccaneer S1, a Rank 6 British strike aircraft. This thing was a reward for the summer landing event in 2021 as the main aircraft prize. As it's tier 6 though, it isn't a premium unfortunately, and as it was released in coupon form, it can still be found on the marketplace for 20 Gaijin coin. After nearly a year, the price is still extremely low, which should be a bit telling. The Buccaneer S1 is a straight downgrade from the S2 in the tech tree. The S1 is slower with almost half the climb rate and offers much fewer options for ordnance. It also lacks flare pods and offers no dedicated air-to-air weaponry. The Buccaneer has no guns or missiles, so it's one of the most limited aircraft at the BR. When fully laden, it can be caught by anything, and lacks the defensive maneuverability or countermeasures to keep itself alive for very long. In Air RB, it's completely at the mercy of the enemy team. It's really a dead element. You will rarely see any high-tier game won by tickets, and as the only gameplay offering the Buccaneer brings is draining tickets, it's not going to be a strong choice. However, its main advantage is in ground forces. It can carry 4 bullpups along with 4 1,000-pound bomb drops. It also has CCIP, so it can get pretty accurate, but because it completely lacks countermeasures, is quite large and unmaneuverable, it's incredibly easy to counter with SPAA and missiles. And as well, any contemporary fighter in the air is not going to give it a chance. The S1 is hard countered at every turn, so it can only really be used effectively and reliably when there's nothing around to counter it. And as that goes for every CAS aircraft in the game, it can hardly count as an advantage for this one. If you're a fan of bullpups though, this thing can, in the right situation, have a really strong pass into the battlefield. Usually it's only going to get 1 or 2 runs before something pops up to counter it, but if you stay low and head towards a high concentration of enemies, you can pick up a respectable amount of kills, so it is still usable in that sense. And as well, 8.7 does have a strong lineup, so you can use it there to some success, although you could just take the scimitar in the tech tree that's faster, comes with 4 30s and 4 bullpups as well, although it doesn't get CCIP for the bombs. So the Buccaneer is hardly an impressive vehicle. But what makes it a bad event vehicle at its core is that it's just not very interesting. Usually, event vehicles that are a variant of an existing vehicle offer something akin to an upgrade or a side grade, like the Beaufighter we just looked at. Not exactly an upgrade, but it offers something completely different, which is nice. The S1 offers less than what's available in the tech tree at every turn. It's completely outclassed in ARB, and while in ground forces it does have some potential, you can only really use it if you have high-tier Britain, and because of the spawn system, there's not even a guarantee you'll be able to use it, plus it comes completely stock. You could say that one soft upgrade is the lower BR, but you pretty much will still see the same opponents as the S2 anyway. At the end of the day, I'd rather have a vehicle in-game than not, but regardless, this one quickly collects dust. Number 4. The SDKFZ 251/10. This is a 1.0 German tank destroyer that was released for the Strategist crafting event back in 2020 as one of the early prizes. It was attained widely in coupon form as well and can currently be found on the marketplace for around 14 Gaijin coin, which broadly speaking isn't much, but for what it is priced very much as a collectible. Essentially, this is a 251 half-track with the 37mm PaK L45 cannon on top. This is functionally the same cannon found on the Panzer IIIB and E, 2 of the reserve vehicles for Germany, and this gun is not great. It comes with APHE and APCR. At around 500 meters, the APHE can only get through 30mm of armor max, with the APCR hitting in at just less than 50. It's usually enough to deal with enemies at close range, but it absolutely does struggle. So, by limiting the gun further by putting it on a platform with no turret, isn't a recipe for success. The early Panzer IIIs are very poor vehicles, and this thing doesn't really add much over them. Tank destroyers in general usually offer a powerful gun for the BR, but have some mobility or armor-related drawback. This thing has a pretty unreliable gun for the BR, combined with poor armor and no turret. The tanks you'll meet at this BR range are very quick and can get around easily, so a turretless vehicle at this battle rating suffers even more because of that. It isn't all bad though. On an ace crew, you can get the reload down to 2.7 seconds, and because most enemies have poor crew vitality at this level, you will one-shot a lot of cramped tanks, mostly early Russian stuff. Ultimately though, the issue is that you have less restrictive and better options in the tech tree for free. 1.0 will always be fully up-tiered, so you're perpetually the underdog here in every matchup. There isn't really a reason to play 1.0. Even if you do, you have a more interesting tank destroyer in the Sturmpanzer II and the Panzer 35T, which offers a better gun in a turret. Choosing to play this vehicle over the other options you have will ultimately limit you. But to be fair, min-maxing your lineup at 1.0 isn't really a strong factor to put this thing down. If you have this vehicle, you're playing 1.0 to have fun, not to sweat out back-to-back wins. But as it's just so limited in terms of firepower and protection, it isn't always going to be fun. This aside though, an event is really the only way we can get a vehicle like this in the game. As a premium, it would be a really bad pick. In the tech tree, it would offer less than what's already available, and it would most likely be replaced by a new player after the first hour of playing and never touched again, but giving it some artificial value as a collectible puts it in the best place it can be. It sort of gives people a reason to use it, if that makes sense, and does also add some variety to the early battlefield. So even though it's not very impressive at every turn, it's nice that we have it. Number 3. The LVT A4 ZIS 2. This one is quite interesting, but not really for the right reasons. This thing was a very old prize for 2016's Winter Holiday event for completing 6 of the tanker tasks. It was later available in 2019 through the vehicle trophy box in the Warbond shop. The box could drop this thing, as well as some other low-tier rare vehicles. But as this trophy has since been discontinued, the LVT has become very rare, currently holding a sell price of 650 Gaijin coin, which is insane, as this isn't a premium, it's a tier 2 event vehicle, which is really odd, but I have a shot at why. This thing is a completely identical copy. This exact vehicle can be found in the Chinese ground tree. When it was given out as an event vehicle in the US tree, the Chinese client wasn't available in our version of the game, but the tank was already available on the separate Chinese client and wasn't a premium there. So it was probably added to our client as an event vehicle, so the users on that client didn't feel like they were getting the short end of the stick. This was then likely recognized as a bad reward, as a year later, in 2017, another identical vehicle from the Chinese tree, the Fengkong T34, was added as a premium in the Russian tree. This is just speculation though, I don't know for sure. It's mostly just the thought process that makes the most sense to me. Anyway, you could look past the odd choice to have this as a non-premium reward if the vehicle was good, but the ZIS 2 LVT is hardly that impressive on top of everything else. The difference with this one is of course the gun. This uses the Russian 57, the same cannon found on the ZIS 30, and a functionally identical analogue to the cannon on the T34-57. This cannon is great, and at 2.3, it does a lot of damage and can pen essentially anything. But its firing platform, when placed on the LVT, can get really tedious. Despite being turreted, its cannon can only traverse 20 degrees to either side, which cuts into your reaction time and limits where you can position yourself effectively. It only has 5 degrees of gun depression, so you will need to position yourself on relatively even terrain, which is a further issue as playing on terrain like this usually leaves you out of cover with gun depression this poor. And as you're so large and have no armor, you won't survive long if you aren't in a great spot. And a great spot for a vehicle like this isn't always available. It can work pretty okay as a sniper though, as when playing at long range, you can cover a wider angle without having to move, you're much harder to hit, especially if you can find some low hard cover, and your cannon will still be able to deal with everything. But a further issue is that the reload is really long for what it is at 8.7 seconds stock, slower than the Panzer IVs, Shermans, and almost every other common gun. Other 57mm cannons offer between 5.2 seconds and 6.5, which is great. This one is longer than all of them, while having the worst firing platform out of all of them. So it doesn't do anything consistently really. If you can find a good spot at range that does let you hide your hull, it can do some work, but as we said earlier, a great spot isn't always there. This kind of vehicle is very niche, and even in a perfect spot, it still doesn't perform amazingly. And that, on top of it being a low-tier, non-premium copy, adds it firmly onto this list. Number 2. The Japanese Type K8, number 13. Not the most interesting name, or the most interesting vehicle really. This was the low-tier naval reward for 2020's Operation Winter event, and never released as a coupon, so it's currently unobtainable. But don't worry too much about that. I don't think I've ever seen one of these in battle after the first wave of the event, for good reason. The K8 is a large, slow coastal vessel with quite poor weaponry. At the front, it comes with a single 76mm cannon that can fire HE, with a twin 13.2mm machine gun mounting near the rear. Both of these setups are not very impressive. The 76 can fire 20 rounds a minute, but it's quite inaccurate on turbulent water, making it difficult to hit a maneuvering PT boat. And even if you do hit, you won't do a huge amount of damage. It usually takes upwards of 5 connecting shots to even sink some of the smaller boats. Also, as the cannon has no AP type shells, it can be tedious to take down a boat completely front on. You can only adequately damage the front of the ship, as the HE won't pass through compartments and damage the areas at the back. The 13s also aren't the best weapon either. At close range, they can wipe PT boats in 1 or 2 reload cycles, but they don't have a great arc, only being able to fire over the rear of the vessel. There's also an extra dead zone on the left created by these boxes. The vessel does have a decent amount of depth charges though, but these are rarely used even in the peak circumstance. A ship this large and slow needs good weaponry to compensate for the lack of mobility, but the K8 completely lacks the DPS it needs to stay alive. Most boats of this BR come with autocannons and machine guns, which are very easy to aim. As the K8 is so large, it's very easy to hit, so even though comparatively it's hard to take down when compared directly with other 1.3 boats, it's still not the most survivable. It can only travel at a max of 29 kph, and as it's so long, it takes a while to turn, slow down, and maneuver. It lacks any outstanding offensive or defensive attributes, and doesn't really offer any tangible incentive to play it. It's a tier 2 coastal ship, you aren't going to be playing this BR for very long, and as the tiers are so small, it can't really offer much in terms of meaningful RP gain. Plus, you aren't going to find a match in RB with more than a handful of players anyway. The best early tier premiums have their value not in their RP or SL gain, but the fun factor. These vehicles are usually a bit different, and as such, they're usually played to unwind and experience a different playstyle, and you really can't even begin to find that with this one. It's not very unique or fun to use, so it ends up quite high on our list. So, for our number 1 spot, we have the LVT A4. Picking the top spot was hard. When going into this video, I didn't already have a definitive vehicle in mind for what would be the worst. Of course, I wanted to play everything again to make sure I was up to date on how the vehicles worked, but as all of these vehicles are still usable, I wasn't sure until I started to get footage. And so, this is the number 1 for me, because it was the only vehicle I didn't have fun with while playing. That might seem more emotional than objective when coming to a conclusion, but don't worry, it's still not a good vehicle. Anyway, this thing is quite easy to explain on the surface. The A4 is a standard LVT hull without the twin back gunners, along with the turret of the M8 Scott, a 75mm howitzer, and that might seem okay. A gun like that will do a lot of damage if it hits, and the LVT is quite roomy and deceptively agile. All this really goes to say is that when separated, these two parts work well, but when combined, they completely fail to complement each other. The regular reserve LVT A1 works because it has a shoulder stabilizer, a rapid-fire gun that's easy to aim, and a really fast 16.8 second turret traverse on a stock crew. It can react to and disable enemies very quickly, and as it has 6 crew spread out all around the vehicle, it's pretty survivable as well. These aspects somewhat go towards mitigating the poor armor, as you can usually fire on an enemy first, so you may not even get hit. Having the M8 turret though, kills all of these advantages and slows your reaction time down immensely. Firstly, the turret traverse is quite exactly 4 times slower at 4.2 degrees a second. It has no stabilization, a slightly longer reload, and it's also not the easiest gun to aim, with the main heat shell traveling at 304 meters a second, nearly 3 times slower than the regular LVT's gun. This means that if you run into an enemy, it's very unlikely that you'll train your gun on and hit them first. As you're huge, have no armor and a more condensed crew layout, it's not likely that you'll come out of it alive. Additionally, for close range, as the turret is very centrally mounted on the hull, this creates a further issue, as you have no way to sidescrape or peek around a corner without an enemy seeing and hitting you first every time. The enemy will always get a shot on the vulnerable parts of your hull if you exit concealment while they're aware of you. Sniping is not a viable tactic either, as the round has such a low velocity, and you also lack good frontal gun depression at only a few degrees. The stat card does say 20, but this is only achievable off the side of the vehicle. For vehicles that have a slow turret traverse, it's honestly better to just pretend you don't have a turret at all, as if you move your gun too far to the left or right, it will take too long to recenter if you run into an enemy. So keeping the gun in the middle means you can at least be pointing where you need to. As long as you do this combined with using your hull to swing the turret around quicker, you can speed up a bit, but it's still not really enough for the almost universally fast enemies you will be meeting. Offensively and defensively, this tank suffers hugely. The only good aspect to it really is the 50 cal, which might actually be a more reliable weapon than the 75 as it can traverse quickly and has a full 360 degree arc. The A4 is also at a higher BR than the regular LVT, not that it matters much as you'll always be up tiered, but still, it doesn't help. However though, just to add some light to the end of this dark tunnel, this thing was released in possibly the best way. For Victory Day in 2020, if you completed 3 tank tasks over 3 days, you got the vehicle. And that's great. It makes it a bit special as it's limited time only. It's very achievable to unlock in 3 days, and it's also entirely optional. It isn't being sold, so its bad performance doesn't hurt its potential as a product, and it's not in the main tree, so you're not forced to use it. To me, an event like this is the best way to introduce these vehicles. So even though this video is primarily focusing on negative aspects, there's a lot of positives here too. So here's to hoping we can get some more odd vehicles down the line. So there we are everyone, that's everything for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. There were a couple of honorable mentions that could have got onto this list, but I didn't really feel like it would be quite fair. Like, the two I kind of wanted to put in were the Orbital HVG. It's the stabilized Orbital at AO with the 60mm gun. I didn't add that in because right now I'm pretty sure it's massively underperforming to the point where it's not intentional. Like, the round just is doing very little reliable damage, and I don't think it's really intended. And on the back of that, if that were to be fixed, it would actually be a pretty good vehicle, so I didn't want to include it just off the back of that reason. The other was the BM813, the Katusha. I didn't want to put that in, even though it's possibly one of the least usable vehicles in the game. It was kind of added with that in mind. Like, it's not in the game under the expectation of being like a great vehicle. It's there just to, you know, be a bit of fun, really. So as the intention wasn't to have it as like a competent vehicle in the game, I didn't really want to add that one in either. Like, it didn't seem like fitting for the theme. Yeah, apart from that, I really hope you enjoyed it. Sorry it wasn't quite the tier 6 and 7 video yet, although that will hopefully be quite soon. It's just that right now, I think if I made it right now, I could probably do it, but I don't think it would end up in a state that I'd be ultimately happy with. And as it's quite an important video, I want it to be the best that it can be. So it may be a little longer to wait for that. Also, sorry if my voice is a bit sort of destroyed right now. This is the second time I've done the entire voiceover for the video. The first time there was an issue with the noise gate in our studio. And because of the way I speak, a lot of certain syllables and like the starts and ends of sentences were completely cut off. So it wasn't really very usable. So I've had to basically work all night and then do this recording in the daytime, and I will do the rest of my workday when I get home. So it's a bit hectic at the moment because I will be going back to the UK for a week in a few days. So I need to get every outstanding task done and edit this video in basically 2 nights. I think I can do that, but I'm not completely sure yet. Someone from the United Kingdom is ringing me on an ambiguous mobile number. I'm not answering that, I'm afraid. Anyway, that aside, I will also actually hopefully come back to be doing some streaming soon with the money that I got from the RevShare decal. So thank you for everyone who's bought that. I bought a Go XLR and a pretty good mic to go with it. And so I should be able to do some decent audio stuff from home, which means I can stream from there as well. And if that all is easy to set up, it should not be too long before I can start doing that again. I'll try to anyway. I often get quite busy at the moment, so I can't really say that I'd be able to keep a good schedule with it, but I'm at least intending to get back to it as soon as I can. So yeah, anyway, this predictably, as always, has been a very long outro, so we'll cut it there. Thank you everyone for watching this far. It obviously means a lot. You can follow the Twitch in the description if you like, or join my Discord if you want. I'm always there, even if I pretend I'm not, I always am. If you'd like to talk or just spend time with people, it's a pretty nice place. Anyway, thank you very, very much for watching, and I will see you next time.